I want to welcome everyone to the September 2022 meeting of the 1904 World's Fair Society. I think you all know I'm Mike Truax, but there's a few that may not. It's great to see so many people here together and guests, members. This is the 118th anniversary of the opening of the World's Fair and the 36th and 38th anniversary of our society. Today we're going to have a new program about General and President Grant, who had just a little bit to do with the 1904 World's Fair. First, I'd like to ask if there are any non-members or new society members here today. Please raise your hand. Whoa, look at you all. Okay, I'm going to open this up, and I'd like to give you about 20 or 30 seconds to tell your name, how you found the society, and kind of what your interest is. Real quick. Go ahead. Stand up so everyone can see you.
Singer, and I guess social media. Found out about it through social media.
Great.
Very interested in the World's Fair.
Okay, super. Need to sign you up as a member. Who else? Raise their hand. Yes.
I met you guys at the car museum.
You got to speak up so the microphone catches you.
That way or that way.
Either way.
I met these folks at the car museum at a car show a couple weeks ago, and then I joined up at the Park last week.
Oh, perfect.
Great. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Madeline Haynes. My great aunt was the secretary of Mr. Craig, who was the, of course, we can't prove that because they didn't write down the names of the list that were. And I have a big collection of World's Fair spoons from my aunt, which I dearly love. My kids call them the damn spoons. They're going to inherit them one way or the other.
Well, Madeline, how wonderful. We need to get you signed up as a member so you can tell us about all that you know.
I am a member.
Okay. There's two memberships. One is the Facebook group that has 5,000 members, and the other is the World's Fair Society. You get the monthly bulletin itself.
I get the bulletin.
Great, great. I saw some hands up over here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mary Kovacs, and I'm going to be a member, and I came because I'm a friend of Donna Schroeder's.
Hi, Don.
And I've been
Mary?
coming for a while, and I think last year, Donna gave you some pictures of my grandfather and his siblings. You put
Yes.
it in the bulletin.
At the fair, we put an article in the bulletin, and the bulletin editors in the back of the room, raise your hand, Janet. She's the one that got those pictures in. As I recall, there was one of them in front of the Ferris wheel,
Yes,
and one in front of them or in the Alaska boat.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
that is neat.
Yep.
That
Yes.
is neat.
I'm Edie Fay. I'm a longtime member. I used to be president of the Demonell Mansion, and that's when I got involved in the World's Fair Society, because the third floor, we did a whole exhibit on that. That was in the 70s. But I call this, I have a guest, Sherry Kipp, and she says, I said, I haven't been to the World's Fair Society since COVID. She says, we call that BC. Good to be here.
Yes, in the middle.
I'm Allison Cox, and I joined, my husband signed us up last weekend at the fair.
Okay. Anybody else?
Kevin Cox, and been interested in the fair for a long time. So.
Great. So of the new members, have any of you received your new member package recently? That you remember what was in it? Well, if you signed up last week, you probably haven't gotten it yet. But new members that sign up and pay their dues receive a new member package, and of course the monthly bulletins in the mail that are sent to them via the snail mail, otherwise known as the U.S. Post Office. That usually gets first-class mail there in 2 or 3 days, but not always. Okay, so welcome to everyone, regular members and new members alike. I urge you to take some of our handouts that will be on the table after the presentation and talk to any current society member about our membership advantages. Please make sure that your cell phones are silenced during the presentation so we don't interrupt the speaker. Today we're going to change the agenda a little bit. We're going to do all of our regular meeting items before and after the presentation in this room, including the drawings for attendance prizes. And we have a tumbler of Grant's cabin with General Fred Grant, his son, on it, and there's a couple other similar items over there. And then we also have something that's actually worth money. One is a mint set, and we also have some non-mint set $1 coins of General Grant, and a commemorative coin of Julia Grant. So Ranger Nick will be drawing several attendance prizes after his presentation. Another little announcement about another upcoming event to sign up for. Two society members, Charles Kaler and Doug Schneider, will again present their class through Forest Park Community College on Saturday, October 1st. That's about, I guess, 3 weeks down the road. It includes a 3D virtual stereo view tour of the World's Fair, followed by an actual drive-around tour of Forest Park to see World's Fair sites, where they'll show you where the Ferris wheel was, top of Art Hill, where the palaces were, and Festival Hall. The class fee includes a light lunch of famous fair foods, and flyers for that are on the sign-in table. And a reminder and update about the History Museum World's Fair exhibit that has been delayed a few months. Their current exhibit will be taken down in April 2023 and closed for about a year so that a new World's Fair exhibit can be built. That's, of course, the opening day of the fair, and they're going to close the exhibit.
That's weird.
Figure that out. The new exhibit will show fair views, be more interactive, and it will feature a large-scale model view of the entire World's Fair. Next, I'd like to set the stage today, as I usually do for our programs. On September 10th, 1904, it was a very warm summer day, typical of late summer. The fair was hitting a peak, with large crowds to be counted on for weekends and special days. It was Machinery Day, a special day. And yes, they had a parade and they decorated the Palace of Machinery. The crowd was a bit disappointed, though, because it had been announced or promised, supposedly, that they would turn on an additional engine and pump to pump an increased flow of water in the Cascades and maybe make the fountains go a little higher and stuff like that, but they didn't do that. There were 3 pumps. They normally just used 2 of them. That evening, though, hundreds of additional lights illuminated the beautiful Japanese gardens near the Machinery Palace. The 30 people of the Bogobo tribe prepared to open their village at the Philippine exhibit. They wore elaborately beaded costumes, and they had been reported to practice human sacrifice as a cult. There were a lot of wild rumors floating around, especially about some of the more primitive people that had been brought to the fair. In 1904, there were only about 5,000 Bagabos remaining in the mountains of Mindanao in the Philippines. However, no sacrifices were made in the village today. It was Spanish-American War Veterans Day, and many Army troops and former military attended the fair. And an advertisement for Hagenbeck's Wild Animal Paradise on the Pike touted the animal shoot-the-chutes. The elephants were said to especially enjoy sliding down into a pool of water. The show also included Harry Schubert's Trained Goat Congress and Lil Kerslacky's 7 Trained Pigs, one of which performed a high wire act. Okay, I'll cover the upcoming society meetings after the presentation, but 3 weeks from today, what is today, the 10th?
Yes.
Okay. 2 weeks from tomorrow, the society will set up an outreach tent at Art in the Park in Francis Park in St. Louis Hills. This one-day event features many bands, many food vendors, and over 80 artist booths selling their wares. You'll have a chance to shop, eat, enjoy music, and see the statue of David R. Francis. Good, good. How many people have never seen the statue of David R. Francis? Got to come to Art in the Park. It's in the middle of the park, so you can park anywhere around the park to go get to it. I'm coordinating our support and volunteers, and I could use a couple more volunteers. And I also want to thank Nan Vortreat for making a generous donation to the society in her parents' name to allow us to place advertisements in the Art in the Park brochure booklet, and also to put our logo on the back of the event shirts for the Run for the Hills that takes place next week, people running all around St. Louis Hills and Art in the Park. So I'm going to stop at this point and move on to the presentation. And a final reminder to take a copy of the flyers on the sign-in table. And the attendance prize drawings will follow the presentation before we split up, and Ranger Nick will explain that a little bit more. So Ranger Nick has been a National Park Service Ranger for 8 years in the St. Louis area, mostly right here at the Grant National Historic Site. He also worked temporary assignments at the Gateway Arch National Park, St. Genevieve National Historic Park, and Reconstruction Era National Historical Park. And I had to look this up, in South Carolina. So I want to introduce Ranger Nick Sacco from the Grant National Historic Site.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it. We've been looking forward to this presentation. We booked it back in April, so really been looking forward to this for a while. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to visit with us today. And just a quick note before we go too far, I wanted to clarify that the items on this table over here are mine. So they're not up for auction or for attendance price. But please, if you want to take a look, I like collecting Hardscrabble stuff myself. So there's a couple different things that I've collected over the years. So the focus of the program today is going to mostly look at the Hardscrabble log cabin and provide a history of this log cabin. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Ulysses and Julia Grant's relationship as well, and a little bit with their lives here in St. Louis. For anybody who's never been here before, you were visiting Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site. And this house here is the historic Whitehaven estate. So it is painted green, but called Whitehaven. And this home is the childhood home of Julia Dent Grant, Ulysses S. Grant's wife. So Julia grew up at this home. This is the home where Ulysses and Julia first met as a young couple. We're going to talk about that story in this presentation. And the Grant family lived at this house for about 5 years. From 1854 to 59. Now, the Grants did also live at Hardscrabble for a period of time in the 1850s, and I'm going to kind of connect the dots and get that all straightened out. But Whitehaven has an important history here, too. Now, this house did not become a part of the National Park Service until 1989. So many of you, for years, have probably been going to Grant's Farm. You probably rode or gone inside the Hardscrabble log cabin. And you may not have even known that this was here, because for many years you'd drive down Grant Road, and this house was privately owned until 1986. So you just wouldn't have known that it was here. So just about every day somebody comes in and says, oh, I've lived in St. Louis my whole life and I didn't know this was here. So now you know. All right, now Ulysses S. Grant, he is born and raised in Ohio. He's not from around here, but he is going to be appointed to go to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, trained to become an officer in the Army. And upon graduation, the Army decided to send him here to St. Louis to Jefferson Barracks. Now, Jefferson Barracks in the 1840s was the largest military post in the country. A couple different reasons for that, one of which is that it is on the Mississippi River. There's growing tensions with Mexico over the future of Texas. So many troops are getting their basic training here in St. Louis and eventually making their way south. And of course, as more settlers are moving west as well, this is sort of a base for the Army for troops also going out to the west too. So there's a lot of activity going on here in St. Louis at Jefferson Barracks when Grant is sent here. Grant receives an invitation to come out to the Whitehaven estate, which is only 5 miles away from Jefferson Barracks, and worked out nicely for Grant because one of his best friends at West Point was Julia's brother, Frederick Dent, Frederick Tracy Dent. They were actually roommates during Grant's last year at the academy. So when Fred found out that Grant's going to be in St. Louis, he said, hey, you ought to go out and meet the rest of the family at Whitehaven. Grant accepted that invitation. For several months, he came out to Whitehaven maybe once or twice a week, and he was getting to know the various Dent family members. Julia was finishing up at school, so for several months, she was actually in downtown St. Louis while Grant was coming out to Whitehaven. But in early February 1844, Julia returned to Whitehaven, and according to Grant in his memoirs, his visits became daily at that point. So he met Julia and he became a much more frequent visitor here to the Whitehaven estate. So the Ulysses and Julia had a very quick courtship. They only saw each other for about 3 months when Ulysses went to the front porch of Whitehaven and proposed marriage to Julia. So they will become engaged to be married, and they were engaged for 4 years because Grant ends up leaving to fight in the Mexican-American War. During these, and there's going to be a lot of time here over the next 10 years from 44 to 54, it's going to be a lot of extended separations between Ulysses and Julia. When Grant is down in Mexico fighting in the Mexican-American War, his mind is really here in St. Louis. There's a lot of letters that we have of Ulysses writing to Julia, talking about his love for her and how much he missed being in Missouri. One of the first letters that Ulysses wrote to Julia in August of 44, he talked about how much he liked the St. Louis climate. And I thought to myself, you're the only person who's ever said that they love the St. Louis climate. And he's really in love with Julia when he's talking about the St. Louis climate. Some other examples, though, in another letter to Julia, he said, quote, "Julia, you say that you often dream of me. Do tell me some of your good ones. Don't tell me any of the bad ones. To think that while I am writing this letter, the ring I used to wear, his West Point ring, is on your hand. Parting with that ring, Julia, was the strongest evidence I could have given you of the depth and sincerity of my love for you." And a lot of other content like that where he really talks about how much he loved Julia. In 1854, Grant, after a decade of service, decided to call it quits. He was tired of being away from his family. Ulysses and Julia by the 1850s had several children that they were raising, and Ulysses was often away from his children. So he made the fateful decision to leave the Army and come back to St. Louis. And Grant proclaimed that he was going to try his hand at farming here on the Whitehaven estate. Now, the Park Service today, we got about 10 acres of the original property, but when Grant moved to Whitehaven, this property was 850 acres. It's a very large property, and I have a map that I will show you in a little bit, kind of orient you to everything that you would see here on the property. And I do want to talk a little bit about the wedding. Ulysses and Julia got married on August 22nd, 1848. They got married at the Dent family city home. So not only did the Dent family, Julia's family, own Whitehaven, but they had a home at the intersection of 4th and Sear Streets in downtown St. Louis. And unfortunately for us, this is a parking lot for Busch Stadium today. You can see this is actually from World War II. In 1943, the city of St. Louis decided to tear down this residence. But Ulysses and Julia had a lovely wedding. Grant talked a little bit about some of the guests who visited. Perhaps most famously, James Longstreet, the future Confederate general, was in attendance for the Grant wedding here in downtown St. Louis. One of our former park rangers made a replica dress of Julia's dress that she wore on her wedding. This dress was made by Mrs. John O'Fallon, the wife of John O'Fallon, actually made Julia's dress for her wedding. Okay, this is the Whitehaven estate as it would have been seen in 1860. So this is the oldest known photo we have of the home. We actually found this picture in an estate sale in California about 1994. Just the most random thing you'd think of. But this is pretty close to the way Ulysses and Julia Grant would have seen this home when they were living here on this property. Now for Grant, it might be fair to ask, well, why would you come here to St. Louis? Why would you want to come here to the Whitehaven estate? Because if we keep in mind here, he's moving in with his in-laws, for better or worse. You know, that could be sort of a dicey proposition for some families. But for Grant, in his mind, moving to Whitehaven is a step towards independence. Being in the Army for 10 years, never really having a permanent home, never really being able to establish a family life with his wife and children, moving to Whitehaven is going to get him closer to those goals. Grant wants to be a family man. He wants to see his children and his wife on a daily basis. And the opportunity here to be at Whitehaven is a chance for Grant to strive towards his own independence. And as you can imagine, as Grant is growing fruit and crops on the property here, mostly corn, wheat, potatoes, and apples. Grant gets the idea that he wants to take this a step further. Not that he necessarily dislikes living with his in-laws at Whitehaven, but Grant starts thinking, I want to build my own house. Again, a step towards his own independence, and it would be the first house that he could really call his own as an adult. So in 1850, about early 1855, about 7 to 8 months into the experiment here at the Whitehaven estate, Grant starts cutting down trees and he starts working towards constructing his own log cabin. Now, Julia Grant, she did talk about the Hardscrabble log cabin in her own personal memoirs, and she had a few different things that she talked about. She said, among other things, she said, quote, I must say a word of this, our cabin. I cannot imagine why the captain ever built it. I suppose the captain was tired of going so far to his farm and decided to build. He thought of a frame house, but my father most aggravatingly urged a log house, saying it would be warmer. So the great trees were felled and lay stripped of their boughs. Then came the hewing, which required much time and labor. Then came the house raising and a great luncheon. So it took Grant about 1.5 years to construct the log cabin. He did do most of the work himself. There was some labor done by neighbors in the St. Louis area, and this was a plantation. The Dent family enslaved upwards of 30 African-American laborers, and some of those enslaved laborers certainly would have helped out from time to time. But as Julia mentioned, in 1856, the whole neighborhood came out and they did a house raising. And the Dents and Grants had a huge luncheon and hosted the neighbors, kind of like helping somebody move into a new place. You buy Little Caesars pizza for them or something like that. So Grant is going to move into the Hardscrabble log cabin in 1856. It was September of 1856 when they moved into log cabin. This is one of the oldest photos of Hardscrabble. This is from 1868. So this is the same year that Grant is elected president. So Grant's, he's not here at Hardscrabble, but this is in its original location, which I'll point out in a minute. But that is one of the oldest known photos of Hardscrabble that we had. Julia, she continued in her memoirs, and she gives you the impression that she really hated this house. She was not a fan of it. She said, quote, a neat frame house, I am sure, could have been put up in half the time and at less expense. We went to this house before it was finished and lived in it scarcely 3 months. It was so crude and homely, I did not like it at all, but I did not say so. I got out all my pretty covers, baskets, books, etc., and tried to make it look home-like and comfortable, but this was hard to do. The little house looked so unattractive that we facetiously decided to call it Hardscrabble. So the Grants moved into this log cabin, as I mentioned, in September of 1856. And 2 factors are going to contribute to the Grants only living at the home for 3 months. Obviously, one is Julia. If the boss doesn't like being at this house, that's going to be a problem. She likes life at Whitehaven, as you could imagine. But Julia's mother, Ellen, died in January of 1857. So when Julia's mother passed away, Frederick Dent asked the Grants to move back to the Whitehaven estate, the main house here. So for all the attention Hardscrabble has gotten over the years, the Grants only lived in it for 3 months. So it took longer time for Grant to actually build the home than the time that they actually spent living in the home. So this map here, I want to help kind of orient everybody. So this is a map that was taken after the Civil War. The Grant family acquired the Whitehaven property from the Dent family after the Civil War. So this property was in Grant's name after the war, and this is from 1878. This is about a year after Grant left the White House after his presidency. So we're in the green circle today. This is the Whitehaven estate, and this is pretty much the boundaries of the park today. Most of you probably took Gravois Road. Come in, and you can see Gravois here on the south. And so the Whitehaven estate was here. Grant was working about 80 acres on the northern portion of the property. And you can see this is where Rock Hill Road is today. So the square here, the red circle of that square, that's the Hardscrabble log cabin. So that it was located north. And if you drive on Rock Hill Road, you probably see St. Paul Churchyard. That's where the log cabin was originally located. So that's where Grant's going to be doing the bulk of his work when he's farming here in the 1850s. And then the Hardscrabble log cabin is about here where the blue circle is today. So it's been relocated, and we'll talk about all of that. And this section here, this big square right here, this is what the Bush family owns today. This is Grant's farm. So Grant's farm is just a little southwest of us, right across the street from us. And as I mentioned, this entire property is about 850 acres, very large. And the northern boundary, I kind of cut it off on the map here, but Watson Road is the northern boundary of the property. Okay, I want to tell you a little story about Hardscrabble during the, yes.
Back to the map a minute.
Sure.
What is the US grant that's at both sides of the railroad there? I mean, is that a United States grant, or is it a Grant's Farm? It's now Grant's Farm.
So yes, so good question. So this is just noting this is just noting the property that Ulysses S. Grant owns. So all these various names that you see, these are all property owners in this area. So the Whitehaven property is split up into different sections, but they're all under Grant's name. Here too.
Is that a German map?
There was a German man named Julius Pitzman who made the map.
Look at the K on H. Brown.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, and you can see here too that there's it also lists the acreage for the various properties as well. There's a lot of and what you're mentioning right here, the Grom right there. There's a lot of German names on this map, so there's a lot of Germans obviously who lived here in South County at the time. And that map's available online, and I can send it to Mike as well, and Mike can send it to the membership too. You get the whole map. So this story that I want to talk about with Hardscrabble, you might be surprised to know that Hardscrabble was involved in a Missouri Supreme Court case. So in 1859, Grant was having a real tough go of it here at the Whitehaven estate. And he realized that farming was not working out, and Grant wanted to take one final shot at trying to make it work here in St. Louis. So in early 1859, Grant moved to the city of St. Louis, and he lived in the city for about a year. And what happened was that Grant sold the Hardscrabble log cabin and those 80 acres that I showed you. He sold those to a man named Joseph White, who was a telegraph operator. So they basically did a trade. Grant acquired a home in the city, and Joseph White took ownership of the Hardscrabble log cabin. Now, the Hardscrabble log cabin in the 80 acres was a higher value than the home that Joseph White owned in the city. So Joseph White owed a debt to Grant and his father-in-law, Frederick Dent, for $3,000. So Joseph White wrote a promissory note. He established a deed of trust to make regular payments to the Grants and Dents for the Hardscrabble log cabin in the 80 acres. However, when the Civil War breaks out in 1861, Joseph White stops making payments on the property. And Grant is concerned about this. Actually, during the war, there's several letters he writes to Julia where he complains about Joseph White not making his payments. And in early 1863, the Hardscrabble log cabin went up for auction at the St. Louis courthouse, what is the old courthouse today, across from the Gateway Arch. So Grant wrote a letter to Julia and instructed Julia to come to the city and put a bid in on the Hardscrabble log cabin, and she did that. She went to the St. Louis courthouse and she purchased the home and property for $1,000 in her own name. So Julia became the official owner of Hardscrabble, even though she hates this log cabin. Go figure, right? So Julia, perhaps maybe feeling bad for Joseph White or just trying to be nice, she made what I would say is kind of a big mistake, because she decided that she was going to allow Joseph White to live at the home and she was going to make him her tenant. So she became essentially a landlord. And White said, okay, I'll make monthly payments and I promise to do this. And guess what? He didn't make his payments. So when the lease expired in 1865, the Grants attempted to kick Joseph White out of the Hardscrabble log cabin. He refused to leave. The case, the Grant family sued. It started here in St. Louis, and it worked its way all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court. And Joseph White, in his defense, argued that the contract with Julia was null and void because she was a woman. Right. So the Missouri Supreme Court in 1868 found in favor of the Grant family, and this Supreme Court case reasserted the right for married women to own property in St. Louis, in Missouri. So women in this state, if you're married, you can own property independent of your husband. You can sign contracts. You can engage in business transactions without your husband. So the Hardscrabble log cabin contributed to women's rights in Missouri. How about that? Okay.
Wasn't so bad after all.
Right, absolutely. So Hardscrabble, after the Civil War, there's not a great deal of activity. When Grant was president, he did have a caretaker who lived at the main Whitehaven estate. Grant did have an active interest in this farm. He raised his horses on the farm after the Civil War. And so there's a lot going on still, but the log cabin itself specifically, nobody really lived in that log cabin after the Civil War. There was an African-American family, the St. James family, that did work on the Whitehaven property. They, after the war, they were earning wages, and there are members of the St. James family that claim that they lived in the log cabin for a period of time. Haven't been able to confirm that, but it's possible that might have happened. But in any case, after Ulysses S. Grant dies in 1885, there's going to be a change, several changes in ownership. So in 1891, a man named Edward Joy acquired the Hardscrabble log cabin. And this is a picture of Hardscrabble in the 1890s after Edward Joy purchased it. Edward Joy was he was in the real estate business. He lived in Webster Groves. And Joy was interviewed about why he purchased Hardscrabble. And this was the story he told to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He said, in 1891, I was out driving with an old friend, and we passed down the Gravois Road and out towards the Old Ridge Road, which is Rock Hill Road. My companion said, see that log house out there in the woods? General Grant built that and lived in it. I was interested at once, and before I got back home, I determined to buy the house if it could be bought. Luther Kahn, who was the man who lived at Whitehaven at this time, he owned Whitehaven in the cabin. I made an offer of $4,000 for the cabin. The next day, Luther Kahn came to my office and said that for $5,000 I could have it. I gave him my check and my note for the balance. At 60 days, I paid the note when it became due and owned the Grant log cabin absolutely. I removed the cabin to a lot owned by me in Old Orchard, 4 miles from its original site where it now stands. There was great danger of relic hunters destroying it had it been left on the Whitehaven farm. My son, a contractor, superintended the moving. It was necessary to tear the cabin down, but we marked every log, every plank, and every brick with its proper number so that the house was put together again just as it was before. So the Old Orchard area that Edward Joy is talking about, Log Cabin Lane. It's real close to Elm and Interstate 44 and Webster Groves. That's where the log cabin was for about 12 years, from 1891 until 1903. Then you probably know the next step of the story, because leading up to the 1904 World's Fair, a coffee business owner named C.F. Blanky decided that he was going to take over. He wanted to purchase the log cabin. So Blanky acquired the log cabin and moved it down to Forest Park for the purpose of selling coffee during the World's Fair. So he's going to tap into nostalgia for General Grant and the sort of the ideals of the log cabin and Grant's humble origins, and trying to make a buck off of that. So C.F. Blanky owned it actually until 1907. So he did own it several years after the World's Fair, but it got in pretty bad shape, and there was a lot of questions about the future of the home. There was an association called the Grant Log Cabin Association. I'll talk about them in just a minute. But ultimately, the Bush family acquired Hardscrabble in 1907. So August A. Bush stepped up, acquired the home, and just like Edward Joy did, they took it down one piece at a time, moved it to its present day location right off of Gravelly Road. So the log cabin has been in that location for more than 100 years after the Bushes moved it. And I'll add too that as I suggested earlier, the Bush property was part of Whitehaven. So it was Grant's farm at one time. So the Bushes, August Bush had quite an interest in Grant purchasing parts of the property and his log cabin. I love this picture. You've probably seen it before. And you can probably tell that this looks like Grant is actually his oldest son, Frederick Dent Grant. So he looks a lot like his father in this picture. Frederick Dent Grant followed in his father's footsteps. He was the oldest son of the Grant's oldest child. When he was 13 years old, his father actually took him out on the battlefield at Vicksburg. So Fred Grant actually got to be with his father for part of the Civil War, and he wanted to go to West Point. So he also went to West Point, graduated, and served most of his adult life in the Army. When he passed away, he was at the rank of Major General, so he did pretty good himself. But leading up to the World's Fair, Blanky wants that photo opportunity again to kind of help promote the coffee business. And there's a couple photos that are taken. There's another photo with C.F. Blanky actually in the photo. But I really like this one here with Fred. I'm standing right in front of the house. And Fred would have been old enough to have remembered living in this log cabin in the 1850s with his family. The Grant Log Cabin Association, this was a very short-lived organization that had tried to acquire Hardscrabble after the World's Fair. It was organized by a man named Richard Bartold, who was a German-American congressman from St. Louis. And they tried to raise funds to not only acquire the Hardscrabble log cabin. That did not turn out as good as I wanted it to, but the back side here, it's got its bylaws. And long story short, the Grant Log Cabin Association wanted to turn Hardscrabble into a museum. They had intentions of turning it into a museum to show off different relics from the Civil War, including some of Grant's items. And they wanted it to be a place for Civil War veterans to be able to visit, and would be a place for commemorating Memorial Day. However, only a couple months after the Grant Log Cabin Association was formed, the Bush family acquired it and took ownership. And I think I failed to include it in the PowerPoint slide, but if you're wondering where Hardscrabble was on the grounds, if you've been to the St. Louis Art Museum today, there's a brand new parking garage. That is where the log cabin was. So it was right next to the Fine Arts Building on the right there at Art Hill at the World's Fair. So a very prominent location. So I love this picture too. This is from 1912. So this is the picture of Hardscrabble after it was moved to the Bush property. So this is in its current location. And you can kind of tell in the back, it kind of looks like Grant's farm today. So it's another nice picture of Hardscrabble. This is a tablet at St. Paul Churchyard where it was originally located. So if you go up to St. Paul Churchyard off Rock Hill Road, if you look close enough, you'll find a commemorative marker noting the original location of the Hardscrabble log cabin. This marker was erected, donated by the Webster Groves chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So, yes.
It's about 50 feet off the road, and it has two bushes, one on either side.
That's correct. That is correct. Yeah, it is pretty close off the road. This is a picture I took a couple months ago. So kind of a nice view of it today. The Bush family did a major restoration of Hardscrabble in 1978. And part of that was that they did a chemical treatment on the logs to keep the bugs away, and that's why it's green. So it was, the logs were not green like that when Grant owned the home. That is part of the restoration from 1978 when they redid it. I know within the past year, the Grant's farm refurbished a little bit inside as well. I had a chance to go in the log cabin a couple months ago. So if you've never been in, here's your chance to see the interior of it. This room, if you walk in Hardscrabble, the first room to your right, this is the dining room here. So so this is kind of the design the Bush family did, but they painted all the walls and the floor white. I don't think Grant would have done that, but that's the way it appears today. And then if you go to the room across the hall, this is sort of like the sitting room, parlor room over here inside the log cabin. So It's a 4-room log cabin. You have your dining room and your sitting room, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Pretty straightforward in terms of its design, but a testament to the craftsmanship of Ulysses S. Grant that he did most of the work himself. So that's about all I have. I see a couple hands, so we'll go through and answer a couple questions. Yes, go ahead.
It looks like there are 2 log cabins, something in the middle, was that in the beginning, or was that middle section added later?
Gotcha. So I think, so the question was, I think you're asking about this part here in the middle. Yeah, that's a hallway. So there is actually a small hallway that Grant constructed, and you can take that hallway to go up to there's a stairway to go up to the 2nd floor.
Was it boarded up like that from the beginning?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it was. You can see here that even at that time, it had a little bit of a different design with that.
Right.
Okay, I saw some other hands too. Yes.
I was wondering, like, when he was farming and before he became president, what were they considered financially? Were they like middle class who would be today, or were they wealthy?
Good question. So the question is about the sort of the wealth and class status of the Grant. So Julia's family was very well known and very prosperous. Julia's father, who's also named Frederick Dent, he was a successful businessman in downtown St. Louis. He had his own business. He hobnobbed with the O'Fallon family, was friends with Thomas Hart Benton, Missouri's first senator. We even know that William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame would have come out here to Whitehaven to visit with the Dent. So the Dent family is kind of the upper crust of society. But having said that, by the 1850s, when Grant moves here to Whitehaven, Frederick Dent really pulled back a lot on his business interest and was more focused on the farm here. And he runs into his own troubles as well. So I would say that, you know, overall the Dents were fairly prosperous. Grant himself came from a pretty middle class background, and he really struggled during his time here in St. Louis. The farming venture did not work out according to plan. So I would say that Grant a lot of the times is close to facing poverty during the 1850s when he's farming here. Some of you may have heard stories, Grant would sometimes cut down firewood at sell firewood in downtown St. Louis. So it got pretty desperate for Grant here during the 1850s. Yes.
What's happening to Hardscrabble before the Bushes purchase it, when it's sitting next to the art museum after the fair?
Yeah, so there was a lot of debate at the time about what should happen next. And so that Grant Log Cabin Association organized partly because they wanted to turn it into a museum. And so that did gain a little bit of steam. But you know, other than that, it was really between them and the Bush family. Because at the time, C.F. Blanky, you know, once the World's Fair was done, he really just didn't have any extended interest in the property.
So it's still just sitting next to the art museum and
Well,
fine arts building?
it's at Grant's Farm across the street today.
No, I mean, after the fair, did it still just stay
Oh,
there?
I'm sorry. Yes, it did stay there till 1907. Yeah. Yes.
C.F. Blanky, is that connection to the building downtown St. Louis?
Yes.
Blanky building?
Yep, the Blanky building is still there today. Yes.
When Julia bought that house for $1,000, what would that be in today's dollars?
Good question. So roughly speaking, about $1 today would be worth about, well, I'd say $1 in the 1850s, 1860s would have been worth about $25 today. So 1,000 times 25.
It's about $30 in 1904. Probably more than that.
Okay, yeah, so maybe even more than that. So yeah, it probably would have been, you know, like $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, something like that, probably. Yes.
So was the cabin named Hardscrabble from the get-go, or did it acquire that name as a nickname? It's just that.
Sure. It was pretty much Ulysses and Julia that moved in, did give it, and when they first moved in, it was just their home. And then just as Julia got more and more frustrated with living there and just not enjoying it, they started calling it Hardscrabble themselves. And it stuck. Yeah. So it was Ulysses and Julia themselves who gave the house the name Hardscrabble. Yes.
Yeah, I've been in a few log cabins over the years, and I can't believe they painted the inside of that.
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
It's you know, it was something that when I walked in, I was like kind of taken aback a little bit because I'd been in the log cabin about 10 years ago for a program here at the park, but you know, it's closed to the public most of the time because you all probably remember it used to be open and you'd get off the tram and go in. Yeah, it was probably late 80s, early 90s when they stopped doing that. So it's just, yeah, I guess they made the decision to paint it white and yeah, just not would have been at the time. Yes.
Are the upstairs rooms furnished, like bedrooms or?
They're just empty rooms today. The upper 2 rooms are not furnished. And the Grants Farm tour operation and the rare time when they might do a private tour, they don't have people go up to the top floor. Yes.
If I did go upstairs, could I stand up?
You could stand up. It is large enough that you could stand up. I don't imagine I don't think it would have been too high a ceilings, but I did get to walk up there and I was able, I'm about 6'2" and I was able to stand.
If you go to the exterior picture,
Sure.
you can see these are the logs for the floor, and these little places are the joists for the upstairs. And undoubtedly, you couldn't walk all the way over to the windows. They were kind of probably from the waist down.
Yeah. Yep.
If you go to one of the ones with white over here, I'll show this picture off. Yeah. This is a picture of actually kind of 2 images the same of Hardscrabble at the World's Fair, which I came across years ago, and I don't know where I got it. I don't know that it's online. But not only did they put a fence around it, they put in some archways, and it says General Grant's Log Cabin owned by C.F. Blanky, and that they're now using it to sell. Oh. They're now using it, they were using it to sell Blanky coffee.
That's right.
During the World's Fair. And in fact, they manufactured for the fair, and I didn't think to bring it. I have one of the little tins.
Okay.
That's about 2 or 3 inches high and about 3 inches deep and maybe about 5 or 6 inches wide. And it has an image of the log cabin on it. You've probably seen it.
I think I have, yeah. We're all good. Okay.
Thank you all for staying with me.
Yeah. I think that's about all I've got. Thank you very much. Appreciate your interest.